All right. So a little bit shamefully, we have to talk about our Canadian talent here. Well, is he Toronto man? He's a Brampton man.
He's a Brampton man's.
We're not claiming the Brampton man, are we?
No, we're not. Nope, nope, no, not at all.
We are talking about Tory Lanez today and the Meg Thee Stallion trial. This dramatic trial has been going down in court as well as in the court of public opinion, and everybody's been talking about it. And the recent guilty verdict has everyone shook. So
Right.
we're going to talk about that. People picking sides, Team Tory, Team Meg. But what we like to do here, which is very on brand for us, is we like to spill the tea, talk about the juicy headlines, but also bring forth a lot of the important underlying kind of undertones and messaging that can be really problematic and that we always like to talk through. The racial issues, the inequitable treatment of different people. And there's a ton to unpack here. So let's get right into it. Hey everyone, thank you and welcome to the Too Opinionated podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Attorney K.
And I'm Nurse A.
And we are two opinionated women who believe that despite what we've been told, there's really no such thing as being too opinionated.
Period. So, Attorney K, what are we going to talk about today? We kind of touched on it, but maybe you can get into the juicy bits.
So we're going to talk about some of the underlying narratives that, can be really problematic that are coming out in this trial. Not only was this trial super entertaining, but there are so many important things that we can kind of unpack here. So, some of the things we are going to dive right into are the whole issue of violence against women, mental health and misogynoir, mistrust in law enforcement, and just the credibility attack on this woman who was a victim and was not on trial, and a lot of this trial kind of turned into that. So we've got a lot to talk about. Let's jump into what had happened in the trial and what had happened in the incident, in case you haven't gotten up to speed on it.
Absolutely. We can kind of talk a little bit about the background in terms of what happened. And, I think one of the things is, like, according to multiple different sources, on July 12th, 2020, after leaving a house party where the two of them, so Tory Lanez and Megan Thee Stallion, I think they were at a party with Kylie Jenner or whatnot. You mix some drugs, you mix some Hennessy, you mix some alcohol. Drama. We know
they ain't going back to the
drama.
Kardashians after that. That's for sure.
No, they're probably X'd out after that.
They're canceled. So,
absolutely. So, like, Meg Thee Stallion and another unidentified woman were in this car with Tory Lanez when it was initially reported that there had thought to be that there was a wound on Meg Thee Stallion's foot that was caused by glass.
In an Instagram post, Megan Thee Stallion posted and she revealed that she'd been shot in both of her feet. She talked about it on a live, and she claimed that Tory Lanez was actually the person who shot her. And she mentioned that she didn't tell the police what happened. And she didn't say that because she didn't want to die.
Yeah. And I mean, things just seem to kind of go downhill from there. So again, in September 25th, 2020, Lanez had addressed some of Meg Thee Stallion's allegations, pretty much saying, like, rapping in his songs about all of the things that happened, saying that, none of this happened. They're just trying to frame him. And then in a statement after this to Variety, Meg's attorney said that, they're trying to smear her image and creating a smear campaign. And this is something that we have seen. And we've seen it not just with, famous people. I think the reason why this is so concerning is we're seeing with a famous, very prolific Black female rapper. But it's not new to Black women as a whole to see some of the things that were happening. And, Meg actually also confirmed that she was actually offered money by Lanez after this whole incident to keep her mouth shut. And then further to this, on October 8th, Lanez was actually charged with shooting Meg Thee Stallion by LA prosecutors. And then on December 13th, Meg Thee Stallion testified in the case in relation to the assault, revealing the events from what happened 2 years prior, saying that, after all this, she almost wished that she had died. And that really, really makes me feel awful that, and because of all of the hate and the vitriol that she was facing online, she actually felt that she wanted to just die. She hoped that she would have just died instead.
It's really sad to hear because over the course of what I think about 2 years that it took to really come to fruition and go to trial, there was a whole bunch of public backlash, and people were, kind of painting out who they thought was right and whose team they were on. Is it Team Meg? Is it Team
Right.
Tory? I think there's a lot of layers of narratives and stereotypes that feed into this. As a black man who's accused of shooting someone, right? And people don't want to jump to conclusions about that for obvious reasons, and
Right.
not kind of deem him guilty before he's proven so. But also just about the victim and how a lot about her sexual past and kind of this smear campaign against her character is what ensued for 2 years for her, which led
Right.
her to wanting to feel like she literally wanted to die, which is an awful thing for a victim to have to kind of have salt added to the wound. So in the trial, I mean, everyone, it was like riveting. Everyone was watching all the drama. It was very emotional, very dramatic. So just recently in December 23rd, Tory Lanez was convicted, and that was a bomb that I think was dropped. But if you watched the trial or paid attention to the news, the evidence was overwhelming against him. So ultimately, he was charged with the 3 counts of assault with a semi automatic firearm, having a loaded, unregistered firearm in his vehicle, and discharging a firearm with gross negligence. So, I mean,
Shameful.
that's a heavy,
It's shameful.
a
It's
heavy charge.
disgusting, right? Like
Yeah.
there like in what world, no matter how intoxicated you are, how is that acceptable? Pulling out a gun. What were the words he said? Dance bitch, right? Like how in what world is that acceptable? It's not acceptable.
I think a lot of people doubted that it happened as well. And this verdict was kind of shocking. And so I think that there's a lot of opinion on both sides of it, but what has yet to happen is the sentencing. And I mean, this is a stiff like load of charges. He's facing what, up to 23 years for these
Yep.
charges. So that verdict is going to be rendered just in the next week.
Wow. So
So I'm
we'll have
sure,
some more details
yeah,
on what how this really plays out and how it transpires. I think that a lot of people will be watching because I don't know if you saw kind of at the end, and I wish I had this queued up. Maybe I'll cue it up now. Tory Lanez's father's reaction. Did you see it?
I did, but I would love to cue it up so the
All right.
listeners can hear it because it was drama
All right,
in
let
the
me cue it up
courtroom.
and play Tory Lanez's father's reaction to the verdict.
You want to know exactly how I'm feeling? Yes, sir. I just stood here in this Los Angeles County and witnessed the worst miscarriage of justice that this world has ever seen. I got some names that I want to call. Alex Spiro, Desiree Perez, and the whole wicked system of Rock Nation, including you, Jay-Z.
Yes. Yes.
You who say you rose from the gutter, but you have traded and bartered the souls of young men, and you're still doing it. Don't talk. You will say, I say this because I'm a father. See, I am a father of thousands around the world.
That's right.
God,
Real
it's
talk, bro.
not over.
Amen.
It's not over.
Real talk, bro.
God does not lose.
All right, I think that's more than enough.
I think
Like,
you
I
get
mean,
the picture.
like one, I don't even know why he's bringing Jay-Z into this and calling out Rock Nation. It really doesn't even make any sense. And that's not even the like, I mean, I grew up in a Christian home too. And to me, that sounded like justice. And it sounded like someone was just upset that their child was going to prison. But the thing is, at the end of the day, if you are guilty of a crime and there's more than enough evidence to convict you of said crime, then that's just the way it is. I think all he did was actually hurt Tory Lanez's case and make his whole family and himself look like a damn fool.
I think that's the part, because it's easy to compound the two issues, because what he's getting at, not in relation to this case necessarily, because the evidence was pretty overwhelming. It was like the prosecution brought like 47 pieces of evidence pointing to, his involvement in this. And I think his defense had four. So there was a lot going into this. It wasn't completely like baseless. Clearly, the
Right.
jury had a lot to work through. But what Tory's father is talking about is, these miscarriages of justice and this system that, does very often not treat Black men or people of color generally, but particularly Black men, the same as someone else. And there are certainly miscarriages of justice when these kind of things get in the way of the facts and stuff like that, as the stereotypes and, this presumed guilt come into play. However, compounding the two, that may be true, but not necessarily in this case, when I think the
Right.
evidence was pretty clear and the jury was able to see all of the things pointing to his guilt.
Yeah, and I think again, this just speaks to some of the things that we kind of wanted to touch on anyways, in terms of, this whole idea of believability, believing women's stories. And I think that, we can't not talk about that whole issue. We can't not talk about the misogynoir that was actually happening within this case. And I think this is where, for me, my ears kind of started to perk up. To be honest, watching these celebrities and all this kind of stuff unfolded, I was kind of like, oh my gosh, it's just drama. But then if you kind of, remove the drama and just look at what are the elements that people were arguing about, or, what was actually happening, it was also looking at the fact that, there were hints of, discrimination towards women. There were folks in the rap community that were just like, oh, like, look at Meg Thee Stallion's sex life. Maybe that's the reason why this happened to her, putting the guilt back on her as a victim of this crime. Or even just the fact that, how can you believe her when she's so sexually promiscuous? Or how can you believe her based on her past and her history? And those things for me made me want to pay attention to the case, because it speaks to a greater culture where, as a Black woman, I've seen this happen time and time again, where our stories aren't believed. Um, even within the healthcare system,
We
when we
talked
come
about
in, we
this last
complain
week
about pain. Yeah,
about,
we complain
yeah,
about
about
pain that
patients.
we're
Yeah.
not acknowledged or we're not heard. And then this whole like demonization of her sexual history. It's this double standard. It's this double standard that, when a man is sexually promiscuous, that it's stripes on his belt. But when a woman is sexually promiscuous, that she's a slut, she's a whore, she's a bitch. And I think that is inherently wrong. And when Black men are doing this to Black women, it is that unique form of discrimination called misogynoir. And that is something very unique to Black women that we face.
And Tori's father's reaction very much speaks to that, because in the
Hmm.
face of the evidence and in the face of everything that was presented, clearly, there's a belief that no, these allegations were wrong and must be
Right.
incorrect. And that disbelief of Megan here, who's the victim, despite all of the, all of the evidence that's clear here, or enough clear enough for the jury to convict, there's still disbelief. And that's kind of
Right.
that underlying disbelief in women's experiences and their facing abuse or assault. And this happens in a lot of places. It happens in the context of in the workplace, when there is kind of sexual misconduct going on, the Harvey Weinstein jam, like women, people question women for,
Right.
they were asking for it. They must have been condoning it. They're promiscuous to slander their character, when irrespective of whether they are or aren't, shouldn't impact whether they were victimized in this circumstance. And people always question, well, why did they, there was a lot of this credibility contest for Meg in this case, where she, made statements and then later either recanted or changed her mind on those and said, yeah, he shot me. No, he didn't. Right. And, that gets into that topic of like people of color not trusting in law enforcement and wanting to protect, theirs or not get involved. But ultimately, women often don't come forward or don't tell the truth right away because they know they'll be disbelieved. And they
Right.
know it will start subjecting them to scrutiny and their character and treating them like they're on trial. Meg said, people are calling this the Meg Thee Stallion trial, and I'm not on trial. And that's what happens to women when they make certain allegations. So they back down and they don't want to come forward. And sometimes
Yeah.
it takes 10 years, 15 years, and sometimes never.
You're 100% right, and I think that this even starts to dovetail into the fact of how this affects an individual and affects their mental health. And I think that, I want people to hear it from Meg. Like, I can't speak for her. And I think that, so many people listen to things that were not factual or things that weren't true, or they heard other rappers or other people saying all this stuff, this horrible stuff about her. Let's cue up the video of Meg talking to, I believe it was, why am I drawing a blanket what her name is?
Is it her interview with Gail? Because that one
Yes.
was
So let's
compelling.
pull
Yeah,
up
it
that.
was
Yeah.
so emotional and raw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's pull up that video where she's talking to, she's on an interview talking about her mental health and how this whole situation affected her.
So you guys end up in a car. You, Tory Lanez, your friend at the time, Kelsey, and his driver / security.
It's like it's getting worse.
The arguing in the car.
The arguing in the car is getting worse, and I don't want to be in this car no more. Because I see it's getting crazy. So I get out the car, and it's like everything happens so fast. And all I hear is this man screaming. He said, dance, and he started shooting. And I'm just like, oh my God. Like, he shot a couple of times. And I
So
was
is
so
he
scared.
in the car, shooting from the car, Megan?
He
How
is standing up over the window,
Okay.
shooting. And I didn't even want to move. I didn't want to move too quick, because I'm like, oh my God, if I take the wrong step, I don't know if he can shoot something that's super important. I don't know if he could shoot me and kill me.
Were you afraid for your life at that
I
time?
was really scared because I had never been shot at before. And I looked down at my feet because I wasn't even, the adrenaline is pumping so hard. I'm not sure if he hit me. I feel it, but I don't understand what's happening. So I look down at my feet and I'm like, oh my God, I'm really bleeding. So I drop down and I crawl in somebody's driveway. I can't believe he shot me.
And what is he saying, Tory Lanez saying
He's
after
apologizing. He's, I'm so sorry. Please don't tell nobody. I'll give y'all $1 million if y'all don't say nothing. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What are you offering me money right now? Help me. And if you sorry, just help me.
But at that moment,
We didn't even make it to the house. Somebody had already called the police, and it was so many of them. It was helicopters. I was like, oh my God, we all about to die. The George Floyd incident had just happened. The police are definitely very much shoot first, ask questions after. So I'm like, it's a hot gun in the car. I'm bleeding. I've been shot. They about to kill somebody. Something bad is about to happen.
so somebody hears the gunshots, they call the police. The police come, and they say what to you?
They tell everybody to get out
Get
the
out
car.
of the car.
TMZ obtained video from that night.
And then you could see the footage of me in the swimsuit, limping backwards, feet bleeding.
And they say to you, what happened here?
I don't remember everything they said to me, but I remember them asking me what's happening, what happened to you, and I didn't want them to kill any of us or shoot any of us. So I just said I stepped on glass because I didn't.
Why did you say that? Why didn't you say he shot me?
I didn't. For some reason, I was just trying to protect all of us because I didn't want them to kill us. Even though this person just did this to me, my first reaction still was to try to save us. I didn't want to see anybody die.
So that last piece there, it's so telling about the unfortunate mentality that people of color have to navigate between and something so awful happens, and still having to fear and protect everyone who's there for fear of how the police are going to assume that, perhaps assume danger, assume guilt, and kill somebody. So she protected Tory and everyone who was there by saying, "No one shot me. I stepped on glass."
Right. And I think that, there is, like you said, there's like that Black women tend to face these experiences where, um, we we feel that we need to protect our communities. We've seen what happens, with cases like George Floyd. Those things aren't so far removed, and we want to protect ourselves and our community, but we also don't want to be muffled and silenced when we come forward when something happens to us as well, right? I think that, again, the whole concept of misogynoir is the fact that there is this anti-Black racism towards Black women. And there's this feeling in the sense where, there's racial gaslighting and tone policing and people questioning our experiences rather than actually having conversations with us or just listening to us. And it's very, very concerning. And I have to call up my own community in this as well. And I'm not saying that you should go there, but I need to call up my own community. And maybe this is a calling in instead of a calling out, because as a Black woman, I have faced this from Black men as well. And I have faced targeted attacks from other Black women. And it's just like, when you're thinking about intersectional feminism and you're thinking about the protection of Black women in general, we should be all on the same side. But sometimes, and particularly in this instance, there was a lot of Black women who were siding with Tory Lanez and calling her a whore and a bitch and a slut. Why would you believe Meg? Why would you believe her based on this? And it makes no sense. It's like counterintuitive to our own movement as women, as Black women. Why would we not want to strengthen our causes? Why would we not want to band together? It's like I was saying to you earlier, you're wearing high heels, but and we should be all walking in the same step together. And I have to call this in and say, you know what? As a Black woman, we should be thinking about, when Black women are telling their stories, why do some of us not believe our own people? It's insane. And I was so frustrated to hear that Black women were turning on Meg Thee Stallion. It didn't make any sense to me. At the very least, in the very essence, should have been just to listen. What is she saying? What is happening with her? Could that have been your experience too? And it just called the question why this was occurring. And it makes me so angry and frustrated that only when the evidence came out where this tape was leaked, that some people were like, oh shit, she was telling the truth. We've heard it time and time again where it's like, our phones, our technology are some of the things that save our lives. The reason that those police officers were convicted was because there were people on the streets taking that photo evidence. And we're like, oh yeah, thank God we have that photo evidence. But then don't turn it against ourselves at the fact that, only now when that evidence comes out that we see the truth. We should be believed when we tell our stories in the first place.
I love that you raise this dichotomy of, we have to be mindful of protecting Black women, protecting those who are not the status quo and who face these kinds of inequities towards them already, while also calling out or calling in, as you say, and I love that, your community and other Black women on when they might automatically kind of villainize another Black woman's story of what had happened. Can you elaborate on how that appears in other instances, or what that thought process is, if you can speculate, when Black women kind of get defensive and almost like point the finger at other Black women?
Well, we tend to see it a lot, like especially like when we're looking at the media and we see these media cycles, we see it typically with men in power. So men like R. Kelly, men like Bill Cosby, where these people in these positions of power, the women tend to be the ones that are demonized when it's actually the person who's in power, who's in control, that is, creating this vicious, horrible cycle of victimization and abuse of women, whether it's Black women or not. And I think it is that dichotomy that people are struggling with, the fact that, how could this person that we've seen, do so many good things, be a part of the Black community, doing great things, how can they be this evil force? And it's something that we grapple with as within our Black community, because there's so few and far in between of us that are making it, that are, out there doing these amazing things, that when one of them or two of them get into a situation where, they might be demonized, the police might be involved, or, we know that there's systems of oppression and white supremacy, that we then say, this can't be the case. But then when you throw in that intersectionality of it being a Black woman, that's when you see the anti-Black racism. And I think this is where folks might not understand that, just because you're Black doesn't mean that you can't be anti-Black as well. I've seen it time and time again of Black folks saying, doing anti-Black things. And it's appalling. It's just like, it makes no sense to me why you would, essentially step on your own people, your own culture, your own ethnicity, your own communities to better yourself, or to think or to strive for something that you think that you can attain by destroying the very people that are seeking to help you and support you. It makes no sense to me, but we see this time and time again.
And it's so important for us to grapple with these issues with multiple layers, right? Because you do have these competing inequities when certain things like this are presented. Black men being accused of things and not rushing to assumptions, but also Black women who have a set of, conscious or subconscious biases, or that people hold those towards them. And, when those conflict, we understand that there is a lot of conflating of the two. And I can see why people would rush to Tory's defense, because you don't want to persecute someone who's historically persecuted unfairly, or who could be someone of that profile, young Black man, successful, right? But at the same time, like you mentioned, you're kind of pointing the finger at the other person who, again, those stereotypes around women and their sexuality and the victim blaming also comes in. So it's really important for us to talk through recognizing, not just, jumping to defend and protect those that we align with, or can see ourselves in, whether it's just someone who is disadvantaged or is marginalized in this world, but also to call out and remember for us to think about the other side of it as well, and not kind of be too biased on one side. And I think that's the purpose of us talking through these layers, because it's always intersectional, it's always layered.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, again, this is where we can say no amount of money, prestige, or fame can alleviate the fact that anti-Blackness still exists, even within the Hollywood system, right? But I think why we have this conversation again is, what if you didn't have fame? What if you didn't have money? What if you didn't have a million people following you on your platform to bolster you up, to say, you know what? No, Meg, we believe you. What if you don't have all of those things? We have to talk about people like you and I that might not have those platforms to have that support. What happens to Black women and other women who are targeted in this way that don't get the support? And this is where I guess my healthcare standpoint would come from, where, your mental health will cripple, it will fail. And again, traditionally, our Black communities, and I should say Black communities as a whole, we tend to struggle with, accepting mental health, accepting it as a form of treatment or help that we might need to have. There's these various tropes of, the strong Black woman, the strong individual, or, we don't do those things. We don't have depression. And again, that is another part of this entire piece, reaching out for that help. And I think that, I'm actually grateful that Meg came out publicly and talked about her mental health struggles. I think she said she had her campaign about like bad bitches have bad days too, and opened up more conversations on mental health, because I could only imagine about people who are struggling, who don't have the resources that she has, don't have the support that she has. But knowing that people just like you and me might need this kind of help, and knowing that racialized people do suffer from mental health, do suffer from mental health issues just from disproportionately, and don't necessarily reach out to receive the supports and help that they do need. So again, like, I am thankful that she had the conversation, but we need to continue the conversation, because those positions of power, when you're, working at your 9 to 5, or, your 11 to 7, whatever your job may be, that you can still be affected by anti-Black racism, misogynoir, oppression, victimization, and abuse. And we still have to make change in terms of these conversations. It should not stop at that courtroom decision and people going, oh, you know what? That tape played. Thank goodness. Oh, she was actually telling truth. It starts with actually believing women, believing Black women when we tell you about our experiences and our trauma, believing racialized women, and changing the culture about in relation to sexual abuse and sexual violence towards women, just on a greater scale and on a whole.
That dovetails nicely into the way the legal perspective and the way the legal system responds to that. And I think those issues are so nuanced. And I think we can all appreciate that the legal system has its limitations and has its, pitfalls. And those nuances aren't always recognized by the black letter law and by sentencing rules and by the people who are making these decisions, the judges and the lawyers and the prosecutors, who are more often than not the status quo, white men, people who might not understand these nuances. And so the way that plays out is that ends up resulting in inequities and injustice. And as we say, if you are not someone with these platforms, fortunately, Meg was able to get on interviews and national news and Instagram Live, her truth of what happened, and tell her story to millions of people. But for those that don't have those resources and that reach, they often go through the system and are not, they're impacted, and they're not able to seek justice and
Right.
have that access to justice, because these stereotypes play in, these limitations play in terms of resources, people who cannot keep fighting, people who cannot kind of rally public support. And it's very unfortunate in a lot of cases, victims are cast aside or people are wrongfully accused, and there is this other layer of understanding. And being someone who, in law school, I was super interested in critical race theory and how these things play out in the justice system, and let
Right.
alone having the resources and access to seek justice in the first place, the understandings of what underlying narratives and issues and, cultural and other traumas are informing how people behave. And so, meaning, when Meg came out and said, no, he didn't, nothing happened, I stepped on glass. And then when she later, told the story and the evidence started pointing towards Tory actually having shot her,
Right. Right.
this credibility contest, which is how it plays out in the court, right? Like, your evidence is weighed based on credibility. And if you can destroy someone's credibility, you can essentially dismiss a lot of the evidence or testimony that they give. And so by trying to discredit Megan, saying she's lied and her story is never the same, there's no consistency, she's a liar, don't believe her. Often the system can miss the nuance of, there's a reason why, she may have lied in the first place. And then she states it herself. She was scared
Right.
that the police were going to kill us. And that is the dichotomy that people have to navigate and deal with, that the system doesn't always take account of.
Yeah, I was gonna actually ask you, because we are kind of moving into like the verdict stage. Well, sorry, not the verdict stage. We're moving into the sentencing stage,
Sentencing.
I should say, and that's going to be coming up soon. So, what are your thoughts? I mean, again, I'm just asking your perspective, but like, so he's potentially facing up to 22 years. Is 22 years fair? Is it too much? Is it too little? Your lawyer perspective.
Oh, yeah. I mean, sentencing is a great departure from a trial. So when you're actually, when someone is facing a trial and conviction, it's very structured according to the law. It's very
Right, right.
technical. All of these things, the prosecution has to meet their burden. They have to, all of these reasonable doubt, and like everything is like very black letter law, as we call it. When it comes to sentencing, a lot of it is more discretionary. They might have witness impact or victim impact statements. They might have family coming to speak. A lot of what will weigh into it is, it will matter that these people are famous and very wealthy. And it will
That's what I was
matter.
thinking.
It
Mhm.
will. It will. And these things are allowed to impact sentencing where the intent is that they typically shouldn't impact like a trial or
Right.
the rules of evidence and such. So I do think that based on what had come forth, I do think he's going to face a pretty stiff penalty. I think people are going to feel pretty comfortable teaching him a real lesson.
You
And
think
I
so?
don't, I do. I think that
Okay.
people are going to be pretty enraged by the evidence that not only did you shoot a woman in her feet and say dance bitch. I mean,
Right.
that is it's abhorrent. But the fact that Tory was heard to have apologized and offering them money or bribes, however you perceive that, to stay quiet, I don't think people take that well, and I could see the court offering a pretty stiff sentence.
Well, as you mentioned that, maybe some people have not heard the jail tape that kind of for some people was the nail in the coffin. For 50 Cent,
Mhm.
it was the nail in the coffin, but I roll my eyes because he should have shut up before he opened his mouth. Um,
However much you value 50 Cent's opinion, but
50 cents. That's how much I value his opinion. But
damn.
anyway, like let's run that clip.
Regardless, I know she probably never ever gonna talk to me ever again, but bruh, I just want you to know, bruh. Nigga, I was just drunk, nigga. I just didn't even understand what the fuck was going on, bruh. Like, so whatever. Yeah. But regardless, that's not gonna make anything right, and that's not gonna make my actions right, bro. But I'm just deeply sorry, bruh. I never even moved like that, bruh. Like, never moved like that at all, bruh. Like, for real, dog.
I know. There's a lot that happens, but
a whole lot, bro. Like a whole lot, bro. I feel crazy, bro. But in this state, like what happened already, bro. I can't take it back, bro. I'm just telling y'all, I'm sorry, bro. Like I was just too drunk, bro.
I think for many people that was the nail. That apology and saying he wouldn't have done this if he wasn't that drunk.
Well, look, you seen that meme and where the person's like, "That'll do it. That'll do it for me.
That'll do it.
That's enough for me. That is enough for me.
That will do it."
I mean, I think to myself, like for the public to have for this to be leaked, I think there's like another additional 2 minutes and 50 seconds that he goes on kind of still talking about the same things, apologizing, talking about how intoxicated. I think he even
and then
talks
he
about
offers Kelsey money too, her friend or her assistant
right.
who was in the car. He offers her money and he offers Meg money. And then I think the other, they all kind of combined to make this final nail, but for some people that this call was the one that tipped them over the scale. But also I think the one that was damning was after the incident, Kelsey texting someone and saying Tory shot Meg.
And I think it even goes on to him being like, "Oh, I don't want the police involved. Like, let's just try to do this discreetly." And, and I think that these are kind of the issues, right? Like we shouldn't have to wait till there's this nail in the coffin for people to believe people's stories. Like I think the fact that there was more than enough evidence even without the phone call where I think that her story was believable. Of course, we have to go through the judicial system, but she shouldn't have to been dragged through the court of opinion of Black folks. And to be treated the way that she was, because I think it was damning. I think it was very damaging, and I think that the implications going forward, um, talking about how this harms Black women, um, is an issue, and we have to continue to call it out, call it in, and make changes. I think that there's a huge cultural shift. We talk about like hockey culture in Canada, talk about how much sexism is within that culture. Well, there's a culture in rap as well. And we need to call it out too, especially when we're seeing misogyny and misogynoir in it. And I think that's all I gotta say about that. That's my opinion. And if you don't like it, well, I don't care, because I am too opinionated.
Too opinionated, always. Our Canadian rappers, man, I root for them, but when this came out and Tory was rapping about it, Drake jumped on and defended Tory in a song, right?
Yep,
And
I remember those lines.
and I get, yeah, he defended Tory in a song, basically saying it's cap. And this was early on, in fairness. I wonder after the fact, where people stand, because there is that double kind of edged sword, or that those conflating, competing issues that I understand people want to be mindful of. I can see another Black man who is also a rapper and understanding this culture, wanting to support, someone that they identify with. But at the same time, and I understand people, myself included, not wanting to rush to judgment of guilt for someone who I understand is in a profile that has historically been presumed, guilty before they have a chance to be tried. And so that urge on both sides, right? That's kind of why it broke down to this Team Tory and Team Meg. And this question of, does rap culture condone violence against women? Are there rappers who are jumping in saying, Meg's story is cap? That's something to think about too. And, for implications going forward, it's for me, it's building this awareness that there can be these competing inequities and
Right.
societal perspectives that we have to be careful with. And we do have to hear out, a Black man put on trial, a Black woman claiming, a story that when people want to disbelieve her, or anybody who's facing these types of pressures and inequities socially and in terms of stereotypes and bias towards them, so that we are having an even keeled approach to things and weighing in all those things that can compete and really sway your opinion on the truth.
Yep. No, I agree with you. And I think that, people might come at us and say, there have been cases where women have been untruthful.
Sure.
Yeah, of course there are. Of course there are.
Absolutely.
But, again, I think that we have to move beyond the fact. And again, I think we should point to evidence to see how many cases where women have been lying. That's a whole other thing. But I think we need to move towards actually just starting from the same premise, the premise that they have in law, which I believe is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you are innocent until proven guilty.
Mm-hmm.
So again, Meg Thee Stallion was not on trial. Tory Lanez was on trial for shooting her, but it became about her and her past and her sexual history, and it should never have gone down that pathway. And I always wonder, if it was a white woman, how differently this case might have played out. I think that if it was a white woman, it would have been a completely different story.
It's crazy, because that's often how I try to check my own subconscious biases and societal experiences when things happen where I feel as though I might have an inclination to say, this has a racial undertone, this is a gender discriminatory viewpoint. I think about, what if these people were white?
Yeah.
What if these women were men? How different would this have played out?
I agree. Them titty hats would have been out. We would have been seeing women marches all over the states. It's true. It's true. But if it's a Black woman, there's a lot of silence, right? Where does feminism start and end, right? Does it end with women of color and it's different for a whole bunch of other women? Or is it feminism, intersectional feminism for all women, for all people? right? I think these are the conversations that we need to have. And again, we're willing to have them. We're here to talk it out. We're here to put our opinions out and to hear obviously other people's opinions as well. But yeah, so thank you for joining us here on Too Opinionated. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button, rate and review us, and please leave us a comment. And you can also find us in all listening platforms. So that is YouTube, Google, iTunes, Apple, Spotify, just to name a few.